welcome to Inside Study Abroad. Today I'm talking to Jeff Palm, the founder and executive director of the Center for International Studies, CISabroad. I should have that name down pretty well since I work there. CIS is a program provider, offers about, I don't know, what is it, like 80 plus programs in 18 countries, 6 continents, and he's based in Northampton, Massachusetts. Jeff, like I said, he used to be my former boss, so lucky him. And but I'm also really excited because he's one of my first guests who is not really involved in social media, so it's nice to have a new perspective. So welcome, Jeff. Thanks for tolerating me today.
Thanks, Brooke. Nice to be here.
Great. So let's just start like I start all my interviews. So tell me your study abroad story. How did you get into this whole global mess?
Sure. I came in like many through a side or back door. I did not study abroad as an undergraduate.
Gasp.
I know, a gasp. I had traveled abroad and did the backpacking thing through Europe and all of that, but no formal study abroad. I was in admissions. I came to it through the administrative side. So I did admissions, then got into international admissions, and then so I was doing international student recruitment. That kind of led me into international program development because a lot of what we were doing were bilateral exchanges. And then I guess it was at the end of the millennium, I was talking to a friend who was an agent in Sweden. We started talking about study abroad providers, and they were not a novelty at that time, but there certainly wasn't nearly as many as there are today. Mm-hmm. And taking a different approach to the field and how we could do it. And so we launched CIS in 2000, and that's kind of how I got there.
Okay, awesome. So, you've been doing this, almost 11 years in like the specific study abroad way. But okay, so not all providers are created equal. And I worked for CIS, so I will vouch for CIS. CIS rocks, go CIS. But not everybody's awesome. And I know working as a study abroad advisor, and you've been working in the field long enough, knowing enough people. So what advice do you have for students or even advisors when they're vetting providers and trying to pick a legit organization that's going to offer some valuable experiences?
And that's a great question. I think one of the things that's always really interesting to me is there's oftentimes when you're in a study abroad fair and you look down right and you look down left and you see your colleagues there, and in a lot of cases you're actually sending the student to the same place. Mm-hmm. You might all be sending them to Bond University. Mm-hmm. And so the student's experience when they get there is going to be very similar. They're going to be sitting in the same classes. They're going to be living in the same halls of residence. But it's the way they get there. It's the price they pay to get there. Mm-hmm. It's how much hand-holding they need. And so I think that's where it differs. I think some organizations do a lot more hand-holding than others. Mm-hmm. I think also there's kind of the value in that when you set up pricing. That should reflect the amount. So if you're paying a lot more mm-hmm. to go study at XYZ University, your expectations should be much higher. You should get a lot more things included.
Right.
And if you're not, you shouldn't. And I think from a study abroad advisor perspective, that's where their expertise has to come in, because students won't get it. They're doing this for one time. Mm-hmm. Advisors are doing it over and over. So they have to look and say, all right, I know that, okay, they're getting 2 weekend excursions here. The value of that's probably $400. Mm-hmm. They're charging $3,000 more than this provider. Mm-hmm. Is it worth it? I know this provider and they do a lot of hand-holding, and this student needs it. They come from family that is not well traveled. This student's never left New England. Mm-hmm. I really want them to have the ultimate hand-holding experience.
Right.
And conversely, they could say, hey, this is a really independent student. We could direct enroll this student, or we could do it with a provider that really provides minimal services, bare bones, but they'll be just fine.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I know when I was an advisor, I also was really interested in providers who, beyond just like the hand-holding, because I think there's a lot of hand-holding that providers help advisors, when they're going through the process too. I think that's really valuable, but also helping students prepare for the cultural experience, both before and during. So I know that, CIEE has a really great pre-departure process that they have students go through. I know you guys have your cultural encounters program that you do on site with students. So for me, I always thought, what are the intangibles that how do you quantify those experiences beyond just like the excursion costs $400, but like how valuable as an advisor is it to me that a student's going to have an experience that gets them beyond just like, oh, I got to go to the Great Barrier Reef, but then what did you learn about it? Was there any kind of ecological anything going on there, or did you learn anything? So I know that for me is an added bonus, you know, to students and advisors, I would say is another vetting point. It's like how helpful are they in getting your student engaged?
And I think the field's going that way too. We're, you know, the conferences, certainly at like the forum and even at NAFSA this year, there's more talk about the cultural engagement, how that's important, and helping students synthesize that experience. You know, really, the pre-departure is probably the most difficult. Because students they're too busy, they're too distracted by school. It doesn't matter what you give them and how much you give them. Oftentimes, it's not until they arrive on site.
Right.
You know, I think there's some nice models out there. It's tough from a provider to do it, but nice models for universities that can run a class. So students have to go to the class and they're based around it. That's a really amazing model for pre-departure. It's the on-site where you have support. You have somebody that's thought through the fact that, all right, yeah, we're going to go see this amazing museum, this amazing site. Like you said, what does that mean in the context? You know, cultural curriculum should touch on family, social values, and gender roles, and environment, and food, and sport, and all those types of things.
Right. Okay, so I can't talk to somebody from a provider without talking about cost. So obviously, higher education is blowing up in general outside of study abroad. But study abroad programs are also getting more and more expensive. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But I'm curious what your opinion is on how we can make study abroad programs more financially accessible. Because we focus on diversity issues, we focus on mobility issues, things like that. But sometimes this is, I think, a very well-known thing, but the financial barriers are becoming even more of an accessibility issue. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, maybe just a quick baseline on it. You know, one of the things that's driving costs mostly is the U.S. dollar, the weakness of the U.S. dollar. When I started CIS, for instance, well, there was no euro yet, and the Australian dollar was 50 cents to the U.S. dollar. The Australian dollar now is about 1.7 to the U.S. dollar. So if you think in 10 years what that's done, and what that's done with expenses, and all the other currencies have grown against the dollar. The dollar is just weak, and we can go into a whole economic discussion about why that happened. But, you know, and I think people forget that a big chunk of the study abroad cost is something that's not controlled, particularly if you do direct enroll programs. You're at the mercy of the foreign university, and then you're at the mercy of, you know, the value of the dollar. So I just wanted to lay that. I'm not necessarily trying to make any excuses, but I think it's part of this education.
It's a real world issue. I mean, it's every company and every like sector. If we take it out of the education sector, you know, everybody's struggling with this.
You know, we're in the study abroad would be considered the export business, and if you think about, you know, what the U.S. wants, they want to strengthen their imports, right? Excuse me. We're an import business. They want to strengthen their exports, and so we're at the mercy of a economic plan that doesn't work really well for us.
Okay.
Anyway, that aside, so
don't quit, Jeff. Don't quit.
How do we make it more financially accessible? Well, I think one of the reasons that short-term programs have exploded over the years is because they are less expensive. Obviously, they tend to be, you know, shorter. Maybe less culturally immersive, although there's some really good programs out there where we try to, you know, get students as immersed as possible in 4 to 8 weeks. But that's, I think, one of the things that's fueled the growth is, you know, shorter time period, shorter, you know, less cost involved. Faculty-led as well. You know, on a faculty-led program, you can go more homegrown. I think the homegrown approach allows you to, you know, keep costs really low. Obviously, there's issues around that. You want to make sure that you're, you know, still putting students in a safe environment, and
of course,
make sure your risk is mitigated and all that. I think, you know, providers too have to decide at what point, you know, that the almighty buck is, you know, when they're able to cover their expenses and make their money, and you know, how much is enough. And there's a big talk about the commoditization, if that's a word, in study abroad. And I think it's a nice discussion to have, because there is the yin and yang of universities. At the same time, universities can't talk, they can't talk out of both sides of their mouth. They are, growing at a flat, they don't have, they can't fall back on the dollar weakness. They're charging US dollars, and they're still growing at 3 to 7% a year for their costs.
Right.
And, so, there's something that has to be said for, you're increasing your cost. One of their arguments is we're meeting the demand, we're offering more services. Well, I think you could say over the last decade in study abroad has changed considerably. There's a lot more service provided to students than there was prior, and students are demanding it. They want the extra add-ons. We see that in our market research, and obviously that costs money to deliver.
Well, here's my opinion. I'm very opinionated, that people are learning from my blog, but so my thing is, I don't think study abroad should be free. I feel like there's a mentality among students. I get a lot of emails from students getting ready to go abroad, or people coming back to work in the field, and this has become sort of an interesting topic, because a lot of people think that, well, I got to find the funding, I got to find people to pay for this experience, and well, I do think that we should provide a lot of help to people who are in an economic scenario where it is really, really challenging. But at the end of the day, it's like, who helps you buy your car? Like, you have to pay for your own car. Why would you not pay for your own study abroad experience? To me, it's an investment. You're making an investment in yourself and your future. And so if we look at it that way, I in terms of the pre-departure stage, always, when I worked with students, always tried to focus on how are you going to make this experience help you in the next stage of your life, whether you're going to go get a job or go to grad school, whatever it is. So you've been doing this much longer than I have, not to emphasize that you're so old. But no, I'm just kidding, just kidding. I could tease of you guys because he's my old boss. So no, but you've been doing this a long time. You've seen a lot of this, and you're a businessman. You're a professional. You've done this hiring quite a bit. So what 3 tips would you have for students while they're on a study abroad experience to make it so that it looks good on a resume, that it looks good in a grad school application?
Right, that's a great point. I think that a lot of students, I would say a majority of them, take study abroad and they just put it in a 3-month experience and say, all right, did it, check, I'm done. And they don't, and they invest a lot of money to do it. They didn't think of it as an investment though, and therefore, they don't take advantage of it. So tip 1, get involved in something else other than just your study abroad experience. So volunteer while you're overseas. Do an internship. It's going to be unpaid. It might not even be part of the program that you go to, but you can find, somebody that wants to, take you on and have a English speaker in the office if you're in a non-English speaking environment. So either paid, either a true internship or a volunteer experience. I think that's the key, is get yourself out of the study abroad, the academic bubble, just like you would do back in your home campus. So that's something that is tangible and real, and you can add. So, still 1 to 2% of students on their resume will be able to put study abroad. But if they can also then add and say, oh, while I was studying abroad, I worked with, the local social welfare agency, and I volunteered once a week and did this, that, and the other. I think that's it. 2 is when you come back, is to make sure that you call attention to it. So write your resume in such a way, in your cover letter, always refer to it. It's a unique asset. It's something that most people aren't going to do. And, as somebody that hires a lot of people, I'm always looking at ways to, looking for typos, so I can say, all right, this guy can't spell.
Exactly.
Just ways to whittle it down. Obviously, in my field, I'm always looking for somebody with international experience, but I think, anecdotally anyway, that you hear often when people say, oh, study abroad experience is important. Well, that might put them on the other pile then, at least to get them in the stage. So that's 2, Brooke. Can't think of the 3rd right now.
Well, I would say for me, the 3rd one would be to try to get at, while you're on the experience, try to soak up as much of the culture as possible. So don't let 2 months of a 3-month experience pass by and then you realize, like, wow, I haven't been to a museum, or oh, I've never really had a conversation with a local person. Try to really engage, have your friends a part of the program, but then say, I gotta bust out of this a little. I gotta meet some local people, try to engage in the local language, even if you're not on a language program, in some capacity. I think one thing I've started to see in talking to a lot of people, who have come back from studying abroad and want to work in the field is that they're getting dinged because they studied abroad in a place that wasn't an English-speaking destination, and they didn't speak or study any of the language. And I think we might start seeing a backlash on that. It's like, I appreciate, I don't speak, I mean, I speak bare bones of a couple languages, but for all intents and purposes, I studied in France and Switzerland, and I did not study the language or learn it very well. And I think other people are starting to do that and realizing, oh yeah, I studied in Italy, but I didn't actually learn any Italian. So I would say try to engage in that, learn a little of the language too. Okay, we're almost out of time, but I have my one little hotbed question I want to ask. So, okay, so university faculty-led programs, like you said, are growing dramatically. A lot of more in-house programs. I think we're moving back in that direction. Universities starting to run their own stuff. Is the program provider becoming obsolete?
I hope not. Child's education running on it.
Yeah, go abroad. We definitely don't want you guys to go out of business. So.
I think no. I mean, my short answer is no. I think that the capacity is growing and continue to grow at somewhere between 5 and 10% a year, which is amazing. Most businesses would kill for that kind of growth, and universities aren't going to resource that. They're not going to be able to say, all right, we want to go from, we've got 50 students a year and we want to go to 150, or our students are demanding it and we need to figure out how we're going to get 150 students abroad a year, and we have 1.5 people in our office. So you've got a demand there, you've got a resource that's not going to grow. Unfortunately, at most campuses, study abroad is not seen as as importantly as other offices, so it's not resourced as well. It's seen as a drain as opposed to a revenue generator. And I think that's where the provider meets that demand. Whenever I go in and I meet with a university and talk about study abroad and do consulting with them, I say, you shouldn't use us for everything. You should have a mix. You should have some direct exchanges that work for you, particularly in programs that are going to be really difficult to find. You should have some faculty-led that you run on your own with really advanced faculty. You should have a few providers in your pocket that meet, general, the general gist of where your students want to go, and so that you're only using providers for a portion of it. And it can make it more affordable. Particularly if you're talking about countries or locations where risk is not as big of an issue, or that you've got some expertise in. But we're seeing also in the field, there's something that just came out the other day. There's a privatized provider that's going on at a major public university. They're bringing in somebody on their campus. They're putting a third-party provider on their campus because they realized, even with a staff of 4 or 5, that their growth will not happen unless somebody is there to help them along.
Yeah. Okay.
So we're here to stay.
Yeah. Well, and I also think, if you're starting a study abroad office, if you're at a university where it's like, they've told you, hey, start study abroad, and you've never done it, I think using a provider to get you going is always a nice way, and then you can advance to broaden your portfolio, like you said, which I think is really great advice. Yeah. Okay, so you're not going out of business. This is good.
And from a business perspective, you see it all the time.
Yeah.
You use agents and other companies to get you going, as you said, and then you figure out, can I do this on my own easily, less expensively, better, or whatever.
Right. Okay, so one more question, because we're already way over time. So you didn't study abroad in college, which we won't hold against you. But you were also an athlete, right? You played basketball?
Yeah.
Okay, up in Wisconsin. Go Cheeseheads.
Minnesota.
Minnesota, sorry. Whoops. Just kidding.
No, I'm from Wisconsin, but I went to school in Minnesota.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay, so if you could go back in time, everything you know about the study abroad experience and where you can go, what you could do, you've traveled extensively, where would you study abroad and why?
I think for where I was living at the time, the most unique place for me would have been Scandinavia. So I grew up in the upper Midwest, lots of Swedes and Finns and Norwegians. And in the Midwest, people don't talk about their ethnicity that much like they do on the East Coast. You identify with your ethnicity really strongly on the East Coast. Midwest, not so much. That's just what you are.
Yeah.
And my first trip to Scandinavia, which didn't happen until after I was out of college, I was like blown away. I'm like, oh, this is where the Jensens and the Johnsons came from. This is where smorgasbord, which I've been eating my whole life. So I think it would have been a really cool place to have a study abroad experience. It it would have put me more in touch with my cultural roots and where I was from.
Nice.
It wasn't on the radar at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. All right, thank you so much, Jeff, for joining us. This is Jeff Palm, from the Executive Director of CISabroad. You can check them out online, CISabroad.com. They're also on Twitter at CIS Study Abroad. And if you really want to follow Jeff, I'm trying to get him into the social media thing. He has he has 4 followers on Twitter right now, so you can follow him at jpalm. jpalm68. So if you want to check him out on Twitter, and if we get him enough followers, he might actually tweet one. So we'll see what happens. All right, thank you so much, Jeff.